Wildlife groups are urging ministers to reject plans for 5,000 homes on what they say is one of the most important areas in the UK for nightingales. The campaigners say if the site near Rochester in Kent were built on, it would be one of the biggest breaches of wildlife protection in the past 2 decades. It's now 25 minutes to 8. Well, let's get more on that story because we are always told how we need to build many more new homes, and Medway Council in Kent has a plan to do just that. As we were hearing from Cathy, they've given permission for 5,000 new homes to be built at Lodge Hill in North Kent. But it is a site of special scientific interest and one of the most important places in the country for nightingales. The builders say they found somewhere to rehome them, but wildlife groups say if it goes ahead, it will be one of the biggest breaches of wildlife protection in the past 20 years. We're joined here in the studio by the leader of the Labour group on the council, Vince Maple, and by the Director of Conservation at the RSPB, Martin Harper, who joins us from Cambridge. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What is the argument for going ahead with this, that the council, and that you agree with?
Well, I think it's firstly right to say this is a balanced application that's gone through. It was the first stage of the process this week. There's further stages to go through, including the Secretary of State giving it due consideration. We as a council, and there's cross-party support for this application, need to make sure that there's strong environmental mitigation. That's one of the 80-plus conditions that have been put on this application. But we have a duty to make sure that we tackle some of the big issues. We've got a housing crisis in this country. Every council needs to play its part. And for me, it's about making sure that we don't take a piecemeal approach, because if you do that with housing, you simply don't get the infrastructure that this particular application will bring with it.
Because all these homes are together. You say it's the first stage, but you have been considering this for about 10 years or something, or at least it's been doing the rounds of discussions.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen some rather cynical last-minute changes from some of the politicians locally in Medway, but generally this has been something that we've seen as part of the future for Medway. 5,000 new homes, the employment, the healthcare, the education all together.
OK, Martin Harper, Vince Maple mentions there the mitigation, and that is that these builders have said, look, we can relocate these birds. We've bought new land and they can effectively be rehomed there.
With due respect, I think that argument's actually irrelevant. Last year, an independent inspector's report suggested that the proposals for Medway actually went against national policy. They're meant to demonstrate that they have explored alternative places to locate the houses, and they're meant to demonstrate that there are significant benefits outweigh the considerable cost of the development. And the independent inspector said they have proven neither of those points. So this is a development that not only destroys about 144 hectares of one of our finest wildlife sites, worst bit of damage perhaps for a generation, affects probably our most important nightingale site and many other species such as dingy skipper, Duke of Burgundy butterfly, but it sets a terrible precedent for how we should go about meeting our housing need. And if this development was to go ahead, which goes against national policy, goes against an independent inspector's report, goes against Natural England, and indeed government's own ambitions to pass on the natural environment in a better state, it would just set back environmental protection for years.
Is it this particular site you object to, or the taking of so much land for putting all homes in one area?
Well, there's two main things. The first thing is this site actually is really important for wildlife. It's designated as a site of special scientific interest. It is special, and therefore it's right that government has a planning policy which has a presumption against development on SSSIs. Therefore, the tests which planners and developers need to pass in order for development to go ahead is rightly higher. The point is, we have a housing need in this country, and the question should not be one about how many. It should be about where and to what quality.
And what about that argument, Vince Maple, that you haven't examined the alternatives? Why this site, given that it is a site of special scientific interest, it specifically be set aside?
Well, this site has been looked at for a number of years. It's a former Ministry of Defence site which has been allocated primarily as a brownfield site. And I understand the arguments that the RSPB and others will put forward. They absolutely have their right and duty to defend their particular areas of concern. As a locally elected official, it's my concern to make sure that we've got a sustainable environment, both for our individual concerns that people at RSPB will raise, but also for the community that we have in Medway, where we have 20,000 people on the waiting list for housing. This is an issue, a real and practical issue here today. So from my perspective, with the mitigation we have in place, 300 plus hectares of mitigation, that for me means that we can look at this with the backdrop of the work that's been done over the last 10 years.
Cllr Vince Maple, Martin Harper, thank you both.